The air in the municipal courtroom felt stale, thick with the scent of old paper and quiet desperation. As Kendrick Robinson's name was called, he gathered his folder and walked toward the podium, projecting a calm he didn't entirely feel. He'd seen at least two others slip in late before him, a man in a cheap suit, a young woman in jeans. The judge hadn't batted an eye. But as Kendrick approached, Judge Charles Whitman looked up, and his expression hardened into a piercing glare. Whitman looked down from his bench, he thought, a flicker of irritation tightening his lips. Sharp suit, confident walk. Another one who thinks the rules don't apply to him. Time to make an example. "You're late, mister," the judge said, his voice cutting sharply through the room. "Do you think the court's time is less valuable than your own?" Kendrick raised a hand slightly, a placating gesture. "Your Honor, my apologies for the delay. I was attending to an urgent federal matter." "Excuses don't excuse tardiness," Whitman snapped back, cutting him off. "This court operates on order and respect. If you can't follow that, I suggest you reevaluate your priorities." The weight of dozens of eyes fell on Kendrick. He kept his composure. "Your Honor, I understand. If I may, I'd like to present my case regarding the property tax adjustment." Judge Whitman waved a dismissive hand. "We'll get to that. First, there's the matter of contempt. Tardiness undermines the integrity of these proceedings. You are hereby fined $750. The words struck Kendrick like a physical blow. His jaw tightened. $750, he thought, for being a few minutes late to fight a bogus tax hike on my grandmother's house? All because I had to handle a last-minute motion on a federal human trafficking case. And this is the welcome I get. Around him, a ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. "Your Honor," Kendrick began again, his voice steady and measured. "If I may explain," the judge raised his gavel, its shadow falling across the bench. "You may not. Consider this a lesson in respecting the court," Judge Whitman finished, his tone laced with smug finality. Kendrick gave a slow, deliberate nod and stepped back from the podium. As he walked back to his seat, his mind was no longer racing. It was focusing. This isn't about being 15 minutes late, he thought, the pieces clicking into place. The vague warnings about Judge Whitman now crystallized into an ugly truth whispered in courthouse hallways. The judge was known for his particular brand of justice, a brand where he saw some men as more respectable than others, and that respectability was almost always skin deep. "He thinks I'm just going to take it." Kendrick sat down, pushed the property tax documents aside, and took out his pen. "He's wrong. What does a man who prosecutes criminals for a living do when injustice is staring him right in the face? He doesn't get angry. He gets to work." Kendrick began jotting notes, his hand moving with the swift precision of a seasoned federal attorney. "Next case," Judge Whitman's voice droned on. Kendrick's name was called again for the property tax issue. He rose, his stride calm, and returned to the podium. The judge fixed him with a same piercing gaze, daring him to flinch. "Your Honor," Kendrick began, his voice even, "I have documentation here regarding an erroneous property tax adjustment on a property that's been in my family for over 60 years. He laid the open folder on the podium. "The assessment jumped 30% without a single notice or valid reason." Judge Whitman leaned back, the picture of disinterest. "I'll review it in due time, Mr. Robinson, but we still haven't settled the matter of your disrespect for these proceedings." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Kendrick said, his voice hardening just a fraction, "my delay was caused by a federal case involving human trafficking, a matter I'm sure we both agree requires immediate attention." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Your priorities, however noble, do not excuse breaking the rules of this court." The dismissal in the judge's tone was thick. It was a message Kendrick had seen before, a clear signal that nothing he said would matter. He took a slow breath. "Your Honor, I understand the importance of rules. I live by them. However, I have to ask, are these rules applied equally to everyone in this courtroom?" A stunned silence fell over the room. The judge's face flushed a deep red. "Are you questioning the integrity of this court, Mr. Robinson?" "I'm asking for clarity, sir," Kendrick replied, his tone unwavering. "To ensure fairness is being upheld. For everyone." The gavel came down hard. "I will not tolerate these accusations. Your fine stands." "Thank you, Your Honor," Kendrick said, his expression unreadable. He turned and walked back to his seat. The air was electric. He could feel the eyes on him, some fearful, some in shock, but some held a quiet admiration. Two rows up, an older black man met his gaze and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The court clerk refused to look at him, her fingers suddenly still above her keyboard. As the session eventually ended, Kendrick walked out of that courtroom with his briefcase in hand. This was never about a tax bill, and it wasn't about a $750 fine anymore. This was much, much bigger. Kendrick stood on the courthouse steps, the Carolina sun warm on his face. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the contact for his boss, Julia Harper. He paused. No, he thought, not a phone call. Not for this. This needed to be handled face to face. He turned and walked back inside. Judge Whitman thought the matter was closed. He was about to learn a fundamental lesson. A federal prosecutor always gets the last word. The courtroom was quieter now. Most of the morning's cases finished. Judge Whitman was at his bench, leafing through a stack of papers, looking tired. He glanced up as Kendrick approached the podium, and a flash of irritation crossed his face. Mr. Robinson, the session is over. If you have further business, you'll need to make an appointment. With respect, Your Honor, Kendrick began, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority. I believe it's important I properly introduce myself. He held up his credentials. The golden eagle of the Department of Justice seal glinted under the fluorescent lights. I'm Kendrick Robinson, Assistant United States Attorney for the District of South Carolina. I've spent the last decade with the DOJ prosecuting corruption and civil rights violations. The judge froze. The folksy courtroom tyrant persona evaporated in an instant, replaced by the pale, slack-jawed face of a man who just realized he had picked a fight with the federal government. The reason I was late, Kendrick continued, his tone firm and even, was an urgent matter on a federal human trafficking case. And while I was here, I couldn't help but notice certain disparities. I've been documenting my observations. He held up his notebook. Not just my own treatment, but the different responses to other latecomers, particularly along racial lines. The judge's lips pressed into a thin white line. If you have a procedural complaint, Mr. Robinson, there are channels for that. As an officer of the court, I am obligated to report any pattern of bias I encounter, Kendrick stated calmly. What I witnessed today, Your Honor, raises serious concerns. The silence in the room was absolute. The court clerk stared, her hands frozen over her keyboard. In the back, a young law student scribbled furiously, her eyes wide. Judge Whitman shifted in his high-backed chair, which suddenly seemed too big for him. His authority was gone. You may go, Mr. Robinson, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Kendrick collected his credentials from the podium. Thank you, Your Honor. I will ensure this is addressed properly. He didn't need to type a long email. A short, direct message to his supervisor was all it took. The call came the next morning. Kendrick, Julia Harper. His boss's voice was sharp. I read your report. If this is what you say it is, it's not a one-off. This is systemic. I believe it is, Kendrick replied. What happened yesterday wasn't subtle. There was a sharp exhale on the other end of the line. All right, I'm reaching out to the Judicial Review Commission. This is happening. This needs to be handled delicately but thoroughly, Julia's voice continued over the phone. In the meantime, gather everything you can. If this goes public, we need to be ready. The call ended, but Kendrick's work was just starting. He spent the next few days buried in public records, and a disturbing pattern began to emerge from Judge Whitman's rulings. Fines for minor infractions were consistently higher for black defendants. White defendants, for the same offenses, often got off with a warning. Then the Judicial Review Commission descended on the courthouse. Investigators began interviewing the staff, and they quickly struck gold. The court clerk, a nervous woman named Mrs. Thompson, finally pulled them aside. I have something, she confessed, her voice trembling as she unlocked a desk drawer. She pulled out a small worn notebook. One of the investigators looked at her, his voice gentle. Ma'am, why did you keep this? You took a huge risk. Mrs. Thompson clutched the notebook to her chest. I have a son, she said, tears welling in her eyes. A good boy. Every time the judge would ruin some young person's week over nothing, fine them so much they couldn't make rent, I saw my son's face. I just couldn't throw the notes away. It felt wrong. The notebook was a bombshell, a meticulous, handwritten log of dates, names, and damning instances of unequal treatment. Her testimony was quietly confirmed by the court's veteran bailiff, James Wilson. 15 years I've been here, he told investigators. Seen him treat people different depending on who they are. Always knew it was wrong. At the same time, the story exploded. The law student who had been in the courtroom posted her account of the confrontation online. It went viral, sparking a firestorm of outrage. The internet was flooded with testimonies, but one story in particular caught fire. A single mother fined $500 for contesting a minor zoning issue where the city was clearly at fault. She had presented perfect evidence, but Judge Whitman had humiliated her in court, questioning her intelligence before making her pay. Her story was shared thousands of times, a symbol of the judge's arrogance. Suddenly it was everywhere. The local news ran with it first. Bias in the courthouse? Federal prosecutor challenges local judge. The pressure on Judge Whitman became immense. The rumors started, closed-door meetings, frantic phone calls. He issued a statement denying any wrongdoing, but the walls were closing in. By the end of the week, Kendrick's phone buzzed. It was Julia. "The preliminary findings are staggering," she said, her voice grim. "The numbers don't lie, Kendrick. Black defendants in his courtroom were fined 3 times more often than white defendants for the same infractions. It's systemic." "So what's the next step?" Kendrick asked. "We're taking this to the state judicial board. And Kendrick," she added, "the media isn't going to let this go. Be prepared." Kendrick was prepared, but Judge Whitman wasn't. Faced with an official inquiry from the state judicial board and a firestorm in the media, Whitman found himself completely isolated. His attempts to dismiss the accusations as misinterpretations rang hollow against the mountain of evidence. The damning numbers from the commission, the clerk's secret notebook, and the voices of dozens of citizens who had finally been heard. The pressure became unbearable. Less than a month after Kendrick first walked into his courtroom, Judge Charles Whitman announced his resignation. He didn't hold a final session. He didn't say goodbye to his staff. He simply cleared out his desk after hours and was never seen in that courthouse again. For Kendrick, it was vindication. Justice had been served. Whitman's fall sent a shockwave through the state's legal system. The investigation he had accidentally triggered forced a top-to-bottom review of the municipal courts. The old way of doing things began to crack, and the first cracks of light showed in the very same courthouse. James Wilson, the veteran bailiff, was asked to lead new bias training workshops for court officers. "Our job isn't just to keep order," he'd tell the new recruits, his voice ringing with conviction. "It's to make sure everyone who steps in this room is treated with dignity. If you see something wrong, you speak up. Silence is complicity." And Mrs. Thompson, the clerk whose secret notebook broke the case open, was promoted to oversee a new program focused on ethical court practices, ensuring the mistakes of the past would never be buried again. Months later, in Kendrick's office, among the official commendations, hung a small, simple frame. It contained a copy of a voided $750 contempt fine,